Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Again on the TUSA Vape Expo to talk about vaping and its future. We're going to start, we're starting a bit late this afternoon, but it's quite normal because people wanted to have lunch conversations. It is my pleasure to welcome three people who will discuss the matter of the American regulation and the TPD of Europe. So I'd like to thank you for having accepted to participate. Cynthia, you're part of the American Association Favor of Vaping. Patricia, Kovacevic, General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of ALO in the US. And William Anderson, Technical Director of Totally Wicked in the UK. So there are many questions. It's a vast subject. We've made the editorial choice here at Vape Expo to cross the European and the American approaches to try and have new prospects. Maybe we won't be able to deal with all subjects or answer all questions, but I think that what is important to say is that there's in Europe this deadline of May 16 with the subject of Totally Wicked and this legal decision, legal process that was initiated that is going to see its outcome in the near future. We are all waiting for this legal decision to know what will be the position of the European Court of Justice regarding the directive. What I would suggest before we start the debate is to have the presentation by Liam in relation to the legal case that's pending concerning Article 20.
Hi, I'm Liam Humberstone. I'm Technical Director at Totally Wicked. And I wanted to start with a brief presentation about the Tobacco Products Directive, which everyone talks about as if it might happen at some point in the future. But the reality is that it became law in May of last year, and it's not going away unless someone does something about it. So it's a very important thing, and very few people seem to know how to react to it at the moment. But I wanted to start just by talking about sort of where this piece of legislation came from. In 2012 and 2013, the whole of the vaping industry was under threat of everything being regulated as a medicine. Because of that threat, I think everyone breathed a really big sigh of relief when it was announced that we were going to be allowed to have a non-medicinal route to market and that electronic cigarettes could be sold as a consumer product, but they would be regulated by the Tobacco Products Directive. Doesn't that sound like a great thing? Well, actually, it turns out not to be a great thing, because the one thing that electronic cigarettes are not, in my mind, and in my company's mind, is tobacco products. They're not medicines, and they're not combustible cigarettes. They need regulating differently. And so the TPD, Article 18 as it was at the time, it became TPD Article 20, was born of ignorance about the potential risks of e-cigarette products. So there was some nanny-state scaremongering went on in there. There was a lot of ignorance about the way in which e-cigarettes and vaping technology were developing. And back then they were developing at least as fast as they are now, and we get a lot of new products to market all of the time. And e-cigarettes were rushed through a trilogue process to become an addition to the TPD. It was published in December 2013. There was no open consultation, and there wasn't proper impact assessment. And I can forgive a lot of the people involved in the trilogue process for some of the mistakes that I believe were made, purely because they were relieved that we weren't going to be a medicine. I think that was probably a mistake, and that is a lot of the reason that my business is challenging TPD Article 20. I don't know if we'll be successful or not. I hope that we are. So what does Article 20 aim to do and how? And this is verbatim from the headings of the Tobacco Products Directive. It aims to improve the functioning of the internal market for tobacco products while maintaining a high level of protection for public health. So how do we improve the smooth functioning of a market? Demand highly detailed notification of products 6 months ahead of placing on the market. That is something that is going to slow down the rapid development of the e-cigarette business. It actually is going to have a bigger effect on consumers than it's going to have on the business. Consumers will not be able to get the latest product immediately. Product development will happen much more slowly. However, a grey market is liable to proliferate at the same time. They're going to limit the volumes that are allowed to be sold, so nothing more than 10 millilitres of e-liquid, and they're going to limit the nicotine strength we're allowed to 20 milligrams per millilitre, which seems grossly unfair on people who actually smoke a lot, because those people are the people who need the higher strengths. So we cut out the top 25% of people who really need e-cigarettes so that we can make these things much safer. Do we believe it's going to be safer? Probably not. We demand that all containers and devices are child-proof and leak-proof, and demand that leak-free refilling for refillable devices is ensured. Child-proof e-liquid containers, yeah, that's realistic. Child-proof e-cigarettes, less realistic. I don't know if we can do that. Whether we can have leak-free refilling insured, I don't know. We can enable it, but whether we can insure it, I don't know. This is the funniest one for me. The way that we get smooth functioning of a market. Stop cross-border sales, stop distance sales as we prefer. That should smooth the market. Markets that don't sell anything are always extremely smooth because nothing happens. That's Newton's first law. It basically says that an object will remain at rest unless you do something to it. So let's get the market to remain at rest. I didn't think anyone would realistically do that, but it seems from the Finnish implementation that some member states see that as a reasonable way of behaving. We can also ban advertising and promotion. So that gives us a high level of protection for public health and a much smoother running market because no one actually buys anything. And that gives a load of challenges to the independent vaping industry. And nearly everything I've seen in this beautiful hall in Paris is independent vaping industry. The biggest challenge is ingredient notification is going to be highly complex. Our products are complex because of the flavourings. We have a lot to report. Unfortunately, most of what we're going to report is a null in terms of toxicology. Most of what we'll report is that actually we'd already screened all the products before we made them. Emissions testing is the biggest technical challenge because no one knows how to do it yet. So we've got CEN and ISO committees that are working on having protocols for emissions testing probably in 2 years' time at best. But it's being demanded that we produce these emissions test reports from May next year. I don't think that's reasonable. Advertising and promotion restrictions, they are a problem. To the letter of the TPD, I'm not actually allowed to tell anyone that I think e-cigarettes are a good thing. That seems a very strange thing. So we can expect continued media safety scaremongering. The Public Health England report published in August actually removed a lot of those problems because we had some real science being presented. Unfortunately, if there is a lot of legislation saying that e-cigarettes might be dangerous, you can guess that a lot of the tabloid media will be very keen to jump on that and say, well, actually, they're nothing like as safe as we thought they were back in August. And e-cigarettes in general have lurched from lethal to perfectly safe throughout my career working in the e-cigarette industry. And of course, the truth is somewhere in between. The truth is that they're much, much safer than the combustible alternative. The final challenge, individual member state interpretation of the implementation. And we know that there are going to be some huge differences between these implementations. And that's going to be a really big challenge in some markets. We've already seen places like Italy, Spain, and now Finland have got some very severe and draconian ways of approaching the e-cigarette phenomenon. And we can expect other nations to do similar things. So big challenges. So why are we challenging? Inappropriate use of the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle says if there's a danger that something could cause harm, then it's reasonable to prevent it. I think that the way that the TPD has been applied to e-cigarettes is an inappropriate use. I think most people around here will agree with that. The one that really gets at me, e-cigarettes are subjected to much, much greater burdens than combustible tobacco. For instance, we have to report all of our ingredients in detail from day one. The tobacco industry is actually on their second pass at this kind of notification. First time round, they were told to get their act together. Second time round, they've been asked to submit toxicology data where they have it, not for everything straight away. That's not fair. That doesn't show any equality. I think there's been very little account taken for a major public health prize. That prize has been recognised by scientists. There are potentially millions of people whose lives will be lengthened by use of e-cigarettes as opposed to combustible tobacco, and I don't think that TPD Article 20 takes that into account. No proper consultation. I'll go back and say the people who were consulted were actually mightily relieved that we weren't going to be a medical product. So I think that I have to give them benefit of the doubt and say that the meeting minutes I have read, the things were said in fairness, but the reality is we shouldn't have fallen down to 20 milligrams per millilitre and a 2 millilitre tank limit immediately. It wasn't appropriate. There has still been no proper impact assessment. That seems to be happening fairly slowly now, particularly with regard to SMEs, and most of the businesses in this room today will be small and medium enterprises. The vaping industry is very much founded in that. The legislation was founded in ignorance and very hurriedly implemented. And finally, prevention was assumed to do no harm. And I found out recently that do no harm never appeared in the Hippocratic Oath. It's never okay to do nothing so that you do no harm. And this assumption that if you stop e-cigarettes from being marketed, you're going to do less harm isn't a fair one. So I'll just finish off with where I think we should be. I'm part of a responsible industry. There are very, very few people that have got to the top end of the e-cigarette business that don't consider the health and well-being of their customers, that don't consider that we need to be responsible, that don't consider that we need to screen ingredients, that don't consider that we need to manufacture responsibly. So in an ideal world scenario, that would have been considered. And the market would drive the business that did that best to the top to the top of the tree. In an ideal world, healthcare, medical and pharmaceutical organisations would be giving relevant information, advice and guidance to best serve public interests. That happens occasionally, but the number of times it doesn't happen absolutely appalls me. Certainly in the UK, we have a number of organisations that are set against e-cigarettes, even when all the evidence should be in favour of them. In an ideal world, the BSI PAS and the AFNOR Norm Experimental would be doing exactly what they're doing at the moment and would be leading to CEN and ISO standards that are composed in a realistic and carefully thought out time frame and are not rushed to publication to try and meet legislation. Standards are actually a fairly sacred thing. Standards should exist at the behest of the industry and customers to produce the very best products and safeguard public health. They shouldn't be driven by legislation. It should never be that way around. So possibly a slightly miserable way to conclude, but I think the CEN and ISO standards will actually be driven by people from within the industry and from within healthcare that will make them the very best thing that they can be, and that there'll be standards that we'll be proud to meet, despite the fact they're having to be rushed.
Merci beaucoup, Liam. Avant de donner la parole aux autres panélistes, j'ai deux questions.
Before I give the floor to other panelists, you understand French, do you? The first one is that there are many people who ask me the question about, well, if Totally Wicked is going to succeed in its legal case against the European Directive, every week somebody asks me. And the second question...
UK of the implementation. Can you maybe tell us more about the process going on in the UK regarding the Article 20?
Okay, the first question, whether we're likely to be successful, that's a really big one, and it's one that I'm not prepared to give any answer to at the moment. Our court will be heard our case will be heard at the European Court of Justice on Thursday next week, the 1st of October, and it is impossible to prejudge what may happen from that, but the reality is we're being listened to. And because we're being listened to, we stand a chance. So we've got this far, and getting this far has not been easy. The second question, implementation in the UK. I was rather angry with MHRA, who appear to have been tasked with a lot of the implementation for the UK, that they left it so late to contact any of the industry. Because I've been involved with DG Santé as you know, Rémi, because you've been in the same meetings, discussing European implementation since January of this year, and only last month was I contacted by MHRA for some consideration. The UK implementation is very much to the letter of the TPD. They have used some of the ambiguity to allow us to still sell empty tanks of over 2 millilitres capacity, which I think is a very good thing, and I hope that will happen in many member states. We are still left in a position where when we sell an empty device with no nicotine in it whatsoever, because it can be used to consume nicotine, it has to carry a health warning that says, warning, this product contains nicotine, which is a highly addictive substance, which I think is fabulous, because it's debatable whether nicotine is highly addictive, but our devices sure as hell don't contain any nicotine. So an entirely fallacious health warning will be included.
Patricia, d'un mot, je sais que la société a...
Patricia, in one word, I know that American vapers and European vapers like Hello. How does your company envisage the European Directive, the TPD, and how do you see the multiplicity of regulations according to the member states? Because it's a European Union that explained that it wanted to harmonize everything at the European level, but in fact, even though there will be a general framework, there will be specific regulations per member state. What do you think of the implementation of the European Directive?
Many thanks for your invitation in order to share our experience, American experience, and our vision on European Directive. And I think you're an excellent audience. Thank you. You know, in Nicopure producing or LC, we have the willingness to be very cautious. We examine the European Directive and also the way on how we can implement it in the different countries, European countries. But also we try at the same time to see the future, how the future will be made, how it will, you know, how it will react in the US. And in fact, according to the states, we have different opportunities. The US regulation will be implemented for us before the European one. So I would like to focus, to start on, an overview, American overview, an American perspective. It's very interesting because Sylvia, then, my colleague, will deal with that more in details, and then I will also share some points of view on the European situation. So as you all know, ALSIC started 6 years ago in the US, and since 2009, it was the same year as our, the beginning of our organization, and the law controlling tobacco in the States, and this law is actually implementing, FDA, the opportunity to, rule on tobacco products. So in the US, it is different because e-cigarettes will be considered as tobacco products because, unfortunately, and I do agree with all my colleagues here, e-cigarettes has nothing to do with conventional cigarettes. But since 2009, when the law was implemented, in fact, the American Congress had, seen only 3 types of products in the implementation of this law. So first, tobacco or oral tobacco, which is, of course, possible in the US, and also personal usage. And then, the FDA is allowing people and to bring more products under this law, and the only demanding aspect is that to be produced according to tobacco products. And in fact, in e-cigarettes, sometimes you have nicotine, and today it's only tobacco that can give that nicotine. We have trials, we have studies made on different substances and made in labs, but nevertheless, it's linked to this, and nicotine and e-cigarette in the United States is considered as tobacco product. So each day we in fact face that regulation, and in 2014 FDA, which as I said before, depends on health ministry and US government, so FDA has already given a project of regulation. So we have already started and seen what they will do with the e-cig, and this is very difficult to handle. In fact, as a difference from Europe, we need and we will need the agreement of the FDA to modify our products, and after that rule being implemented. So if, for example, a manufacturer is in the United States, it will need to be seen by the FDA and approved by the FDA and then controlled by the FDA, because FDA will send inspectors and people who will really make those controls. And before sending the products in Europe, we need to be updated. We need to respect the American regulation, because it's like that. The manufacturer is in Florida. So for us, I think it's also very important making comparisons with the US. Well, it is easier in Europe, easier because here you just need to notify, to central authorities or, different organisms and bodies. But we do not need to have the agreement of those authorities, European authorities. In the States, we do need to have the FDA agreements and approval. So in those 6 years, which have, in these recent 6 years, since those laws on tobacco, the FDA or did not give the opportunity to have conventional tobacco products, but only to make some changes on modified products. So very few, and actually this means that it will be very difficult really in the States to change these tobacco products already on the market and according to the regulation. On the contrary, in Europe, you will have the opportunity to modify them. And as you all know, we need to make a notification 6 months before the launching of a new product. And is it difficult? Yes, of course it is, to do it, to implement it, and mainly if each country has to make its own interpretation of the law of the different countries and, on the marketing also. So advertising, of course, it will be extremely difficult. So how shall we have a success, for example, or will it be a failure? That will be very, very expensive, much more expensive. And in fact, we need to, in a certain way, we need to have European manufacturers and American manufacturers, both manufacturers, just the opportunity to know, to learn the regulations, the two regulations, the European one and the American one. And, this is fundamental because we need to share this, because you have also great diffusion also in China, in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. We have the same problem, but also it's a great opportunity, if I may say, for big companies. They need to respect all these laws, all these rules, and it will be more expensive, but on the other hand, it will also be very important, very demanding, and products will, be examined very well, very in an accurate way. And I think that, the number of products that you have here, and you will have even more products tomorrow in the future, but Having said that, for us, it's more important to start with the ingredients, the components, really seeing the techniques used. And if we can, and if we are happy of the quality controls in the States, which is quite strict, of course, well, I think that we can for sure make everything possible to sell and to continue selling our products in Europe. But having said that, I do hope that the process you were dealing with, Totally Wicked, will have a great success, really. Indeed, it is an opportunity to reduce the costs of tobacco, conventional tobacco, and I think it's a great opportunity to seize in order to improve public health with those products. And also it is an opportunity, it's an opportunity which goes beyond the law, the regulation. And if the regulation is not enough, or is not correct, you need to, use all the opportunities, all the possibilities to change that in the States. That should be, and that could be, a great idea and an other way, alternative way to contrast also that aspect, and that can also delay the implementation of the American law. But before or after, we need to absolutely respect the laws, because it's not something. I mean, they're good for the consumer, and at the same way, they need to reflect. We need to reflect on the future, on the opportunities, on health problems. Sorry, just a few words. I am very curious, and listening to you, we have the feeling that things are totally already decided, regulation which is very strict. But can we say really that things are already fixed? And is it possible to make different, changes? And with the FDA, it's really the end. I mean, as you said. Yes. Actually, it is still possible to make a change maybe after the regulation is implemented. In fact, the FDA, after the control law of 2010, we had a conventional law on these products, and we had actually different, parts which had been contested, even from companies like mine, where I worked before. And, we had different people contesting and criticizing. So that's why this law is not 100% applicable even for conventional products. You have some changes, some modifications, because in the States, the laws can, have the opportunity to implement some parts of this law. But at the end of the day, the main aspects, but not 100%, it will be implemented. Cynthia, Cabrera, you have a lot of work, and when we listen to Patricia, we are getting into details, and it is in the States a very different world. And in fact, sometimes we do have problems to see the future of the regulation in Europe. I think that Totally Wicked or Fivape, they're in favor of regulation, of framework for responsible vaping. In the States, things are even go beyond. And what is your position today? What are the actions? Just facing that regulation in the US.
So in the US we have, let me go back. Our trade association, the Smoke-Free Alternatives Trade Association, represents quite a lot of manufacturers and retailers in the vapor space, about a little over 600. These companies are very concerned about the situation with the FDA because it is extremely uncertain for them. And as Patricia pointed out, there is a possibility of changes at some point. However, it makes it very difficult for them to conduct long-term business without knowing what will happen to them. So for example, if there are no changes to the current regulations as they have been proposed, the cost of compliance will be so prohibitive, so expensive, that the overwhelming majority of companies will be unable to comply and would be out of business. So dealing with this has been very difficult because there is a big concern, of course, for the future. A lot of people have made a lot of money, but they have also created large companies that they would like to leave a legacy with. So when they look at FDA and planning for it, they take several directions. One is that perhaps they just wait and see what the FDA comes out with, and then when the FDA makes their decision, they will close their doors and leave the business. Other companies are attempting to meet or exceed regulation that they believe will come, and they're trying to pass that so that when the regulation comes, they can easily go along with whatever it is. The problem is we don't know what those regulations will be, and it is extremely expensive. The estimate has been put at $2 million per SKU. So for every flavor in every nicotine strength, you're looking at a lot of money. And another avenue that a lot of companies are looking at is consolidating into much larger players so that they can combat or deal with FDA. Luckily, in the United States, we have flexibility with our judicial system, and that is always a last resort, some lawsuit of some kind. I don't know what, if any, possibility there is of winning one, but there's always that choice. And there has been a lot of dialogue with the companies and FDA about what companies can do. Currently, if nothing changes from what was proposed last year, it would eliminate the industry virtually.
Patricia, est-ce que vous avez le sentiment?
Patricia, do you feel that SMEs have the opportunity to survive in the States, and then in Europe? We'll ask the same question to Liam. Well, I do agree with Cynthia, and it will be very, very difficult, very hard to handle the situation in the States. But I do disagree on another point. I think we already know what is the regulation and what the regulation will tell. So administrative, idea is that the FDA has published the law, the project of that law, and in order to change it, the FDA should have a new public consultation. In fact, that public consultation is already closed. It has been closed 1 year ago, and FDA has received, thousands of comments on that consultation, on that process, and according to that process in the States, they should make it again. But the FDA has that pressure from the Congress to, have this regulation passed, and they cannot change so much things. As we saw, it's clear what they say is very simple. Just a few paragraphs saying that products coming from tobacco will be regulated also as tobacco products, like cigarettes, like, conventional products, which are already studied. And then in the text, we can see also what it means, really, in depth. So I think we've already had an overview from 1 year and a half, but for a company like ours, or biggest one, we have an expertise, we have, knowledge, we have also the means to get prepared. So it is true that very, very small companies will be, it will be impossible because too expensive for them. And also, Cynthia, I do agree when she says that it means probably that, 85% or even more, or even 90% of the market that will disappear. So, it's really terrible, and in 1 year and a half it will be a disaster. You have, of course, the black market and, products which are not possible and permitted, and then about 10 or 15 companies still alive. So it will be extremely difficult in the States. But then the FDA will not eliminate and cancel immediately those companies. You must not think that, when the regulation will be implemented, the FDA will go and see and close the manufacturers. No, not at all. It is a process. It is how to obtain the agreement from the FDA to obtain new products and to close little by little all the producers. The smallest one are the first. So it will be terrible because they will survive like 1, 2 years, maybe 3, but then the FDA will start, closing each of these companies. So we are still, dealing with the proportion here, and which is very present in the legal procedure for totally wicked. For Europe, do you think that the proportion can still exist, as compared to these products which are less dangerous than tobacco? Do European SMEs would be, able to work in Europe and survive?
Interesting you asked me about that, because the first thing that I need to think about is that I hadn't really considered the FDA regulation could be so draconian as to disproportionately shut down effectively an entire industry. From a UK perspective, from the vape industry, yes, Totally Wicked is a relatively big player, perhaps the biggest. But I am very aware that our industry is made up largely of small and medium enterprises. There are a lot of businesses out there. And you know what? Most of them are doing a really, really responsible job and don't deserve to be shut down. And I think that within the UK and Europe, there is the potential for people to survive the legislation, even if our challenges to it are not successful. It's going to be expensive. It's not going to cost us $2 million per SKU. It'll cost us substantially less than that. But I think for most small and medium businesses, a very significant proportion of revenue will have to be spent on meeting notifications. So do I think that's disproportionate? Yes, of course I do, because people are still allowed to sell an incredibly cheap product that is incredibly effective at making people ill and dying. And that they're allowed to do so under a lighter control regime than we suffer. So yes, I believe that what we're suffering is still disproportionate, perhaps nothing like as disproportionate as the FDA regulation.
I think in the debate we also deal with the perception of vape and the industry of vaping, which is quite, poor sometimes. I will show you a video, Cynthia, probably you've already seen it and watched it, from California Department of Public Health. It is a video which was, very popular in the States, and we'll continue our debate afterwards.
The aromatic annual called tobacco.
Donc Cynthia, c'est vrai que dans ce débat sur la...
So in this debate on regulation, we also, must think about the identity of the actors. And, in the States and in Europe, a lot of public authorities and politicians actually ask, or the members of parliament consider that e-cig is the new weapon of big tobacco. And on the other hand, you have independent companies which try to say, no, we are different, we are reducing risk, will never be big tobacco. What do you think? Is there also a bad interpretation of this revolution, of that technical revolution of vaping, and where, independent industry is considered as tobacco industry, whereas it's not the truth, as we in fact we saw in that campaign in California?
One of the issues that we deal with on a constant basis is the lack of understanding about the vapor industry and where it came from and who started it. In the United States, we're very fortunate in that the vapor industry is extremely vibrant and it's big in that there are a lot of players. And we're very proud to say that the vapor industry grew organically. It was not assisted by a large tobacco company. It was not the brainchild of one of the big tobaccos. It was a lot of independent entrepreneurs and visionaries who saw something, they had a product that worked for them, and they wanted to present this to other people. They wanted to be able to share this experience with others, and so they started these businesses. The state of California, who created the video you just saw, is a particular headache for me and our membership in general. I frequently say I wish California would sink into the Pacific because it is such a problem state. It was sort of ground zero for tobacco control. California is vehemently anti-tobacco, so it is ironic that they don't understand that the very people, the vapor industry, that they are vilifying and turning into enemies are actually on the same side as them. We had a legislator in the state of California who introduced legislation to classify vapor as tobacco, and in a side conversation with one of our lobbyists, he explained he wanted to do this because he didn't care what was in it, he didn't like the look of it. So the fact that millions of people are switching from combusted tobacco to vapor products was irrelevant to him. And the public health perspective in California is also very damaging and concerning because California is actually considered to be a state that is worried about health and its citizens and that kind of thing. And the absolute lack of information is extremely damaging. The way the California legislature approaches vapor products right now is that they are more comfortable with people continuing to smoke combusted cigarettes than to use a vapor product. They have decided that vapor is entirely the puppet, the creation of big tobacco. Everyone in this building is a puppet of big tobacco, and they know better than we do. We just finished a special session in California where I can tell you we were working around the clock, all our members, our lobbyists. It was extremely suspenseful, very difficult, and it came down to the wire, but we just got away from being classified fully as tobacco in California in advance of the FDA. They are working to regulate and eventually tax and legislate these products exactly as if they were tobacco without waiting to see what the federal government will do. And they will say anything.
Liam, par rapport à la perception.
Liam, as far as the public authorities are concerned, you still have a big change, still about California and different reports in England. Do you think that this report, Public Health England, is saying that it is 95% less harmful than tobacco, can change the overall perception of the product?
Can you just give us your analysis about the new report from Public Health England, just to make a parallel with the California situation?
Yeah, I think it's about as far from parallel as we could possibly get. Public Health England, which is a government agency within the UK, commissioned their second report on e-cigarettes and what's happening with e-cigarettes, and it was published in August. The findings of the report were very interesting. I'm guessing most of the health from using vapor things are very familiar to everyone because the findings so far are extremely positive. Public Health England have come out and made a statement that they believe e-cigarettes and vaping products to be 95% safer conservatively than cigarette smoking. I don't particularly like the way that they phrase that. I would prefer to state it as in the original report they pulled that from, which is that at very worst, vaping products present 5% of the harm of cigarettes. And that is very much a worst case scenario. Other findings from the Public Health England report, the gateway effect doesn't exist. And it said categorically in the report that there is no evidence of non-smoking teenagers using electronic cigarettes apart from experimentation, and they do not continue to use the products. So very contrary to the Californian reports. The one that I was particularly interested by was the Californian one, where they have a statistic for the number of young people who use e-cigarettes and then go on to use cigarettes. They didn't establish any causal link between those two things. Perhaps those young people just had a propensity to enjoy trying experimentation by inhalation. But no, it's very much like the case of the drunk who punched someone on an airline who happened to be using an e-cigarette. The e-cigarette was the problem, not the fact that he was drunk. Similarly, the fact that people have ever tried an e-cigarette must be the only reason they ever try combustible tobacco. We still have a battle to do, but the Public Health England report fell entirely and totally on the side of the vaping industry. It also noted that the e-cigarette as a medical product has not emerged, and it must have not emerged for a reason. Following this, the UK media launched into a frenzy about prescription e-cigarettes. There is nothing in the report that suggests prescription e-cigarettes are a good idea. There's nothing in the report that suggests they should ever be used. There is one line at the end of the Public Health England press release where Health England, they commissioned the report, they didn't write it, they wrote their press release. They would like to see a prescription e-cigarette. Certainly Totally Wicked has no interest in producing one.
Absolutely. Merci. Je me tourne vers le public.
Thank you. I turn to the audience. Do you have any questions for our three guests? There's a mic that circulates.
On behalf of a good part of the vaping community, if not all of it, perhaps all of it, thank Liam and his company for their courage and dedication in tackling the directive. To the extent, by the way, that if all goes well on the 1st of October, I invite all my French friends to sing God Save the Queen. Patricia and Cynthia can join in. But my question is, I think we've all been talking about open systems, electronic cigarettes with tanks, often called second and third generation. How do you think the legislation will affect the sealed systems, often called cigalikes or first generation?
I'll start on that one, because my dismay at the Tobacco Products Directive as it was written was that it favoured those devices so very heavily. It was no surprise, given the people that already produce cigar-like devices and continue to produce cigar-like devices in what appears to be, in most of the world, very much a declining market, but very disappointing that the regulation veered very much towards making those the most viable devices.
Patricia, sur les systèmes ouverts, systèmes fermés.
Patricia, regarding open and closed systems, can the FDA regulation have a role by favoring one against the other? The regulation that the FDA is going to adopt should not include a standardization of products. So it's not going to include to forbid liquid or anything of the kind. It should be the same for the two. We have seen a development in the states of the US. They've got their own laws that are independent from the federal law. They can, set up taxes or other kinds of local regulations. In Indiana, for example, Massachusetts or California, that will favor cigar-likes and not electronic cigarettes with tanks. In the future, it should be more difficult for liquid based cigarettes because the manufacturing of liquids will be more closely monitored. But for the time being, no, it's at the state level that you see a change of behavior. Cynthia, will the black market go skyrocketing in the US do you think, following the FDA regulation?
Well, it depends on when everything is finalized. And I just wanted to comment on the cigalikes. There is a misconception in the United States among the different states that cigalikes are somehow more acceptable, perhaps, because they look like something more recognizable. And the threat for the small businesses, and just so you understand, in the United States, a small business is something under 350 employees. So the bulk, the grand majority of the businesses in the vapor space are actually considered micro businesses because they are so much smaller than what is considered a small business. The cigalike products are more recognizable, so they understand it. People see an open tank system and it makes them very nervous. They don't know what to do with it. It makes it more difficult because legislators who are concerned will say, well, you can vape anything. And they will conflate or confuse what the issue is with regulating or legislating vapor products and whether you can use them with something else. And it's a big problem for the businesses, primarily because our vapor businesses don't really carry a lot of cigalike products. The businesses that we represent mostly have open tank systems and e-liquid. They're manufacturers in the United States. You will find cigalikes in convenience stores, which are traditional tobacco distribution outlets, which are very accustomed to the regulation and how things are managed. So in some cases, we have had convenience stores, 7-Eleven or larger stores like this, actually oppose legislation that would favor vapor, open vapor.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Are there other questions? Thank you for the different presentations. My name is Peter Beckett. I represent a UK company, a manufacturer of e-liquids. My question, more for my friend of Totally Wicked, is first, if next Thursday you've got your case in court, do you accept to get the details of the final decision on Thursday, or will there be a process after that to have the details? And if you win, what do you think is going to happen afterwards? Do you believe that there's a risk that if we lose against TPD, what is going to follow is going to be worse, and in 6 months' time, we're going to regret the TPD?
Good questions, Peter, thank you. And I had to listen to the translation. Let's start with, should we be unsuccessful with our case next week? We act within the law as a business. We always have done. We intend to continue to act within the law. That, as far as I know, we have very limited right to appeal. So we may end up just in exactly the same boat as everyone else, because we've not managed to make any changes. If we win, we're taking a lot of people with us. And if we are successful, I think that it is unthinkable that we could end up with something worse, because a judgment will have been made by the Court of Justice of the European Union that has said that the TPD is disproportionate. So if we win, can we get anything worse? Not realistically. We've said these laws are disproportionate and need adjusting to suit. So I would expect that our winning would mean that those laws are adjusted to suit. I know a few people have said that they expect that should we win, we'll have to go down a medical route. That's not going to happen. There's absolutely no way that that can happen. So what will victory look like should we be successful? I don't know whether we can remove the Article 20 of the TPD entirely. That would be a very nice place to end up, because it will mean that we can relapse to consumer regulations that have been shown by the Public Health England report to actually be perfectly satisfactory. So that is a place that we could end up. More likely is the victory will look like the TPD, but with some changes made to it to make it a little bit more reasonable in allowing responsible businesses to thrive.
Patricia, vous avez le sentiment que la directive...
Patricia, do you got the feeling that the European directive is not as bad as what is happening in the US? And do you think it should be taken as is to continue moving forward and market vaping products? Or do you believe it could be an ideal world, as Totally Wicked was telling us about? I hope that Totally Wicked is going to win. But I don't agree to say that if the European directive changes, I think that individual countries of the EU can pass laws against relating to e-cigarettes without waiting for European directive. They've done it in the past. So even if we don't have the directive in May next year, if Totally Wicked wins, it is not excluded that 2 or 3 or 15 countries of the EU that oppose e-cigarettes pass laws themselves, not to forbid e-cigarettes, but to regulate them, asking for notifications, etc. So forbidding advertising, I think it's not that easy. Even if Totally Wicked wins, it's not going to be an ideal world. It doesn't mean that there won't be laws in Europe. Peter?
Do you get a judgment on Thursday, or do we then have to wait another couple of weeks and see what happens?
As far as I know, we get final judgment on Thursday.
And that's in the court in Luxembourg, isn't it?
It is.
CJ. Oh, well, I'll see you there, so I'll go along and have.
You
a look.
won't see me there. My dog ate my passport, but.
Then what are you doing here?
Good question.
You said something very interesting in your answer. What does victory look like? We're not going to get rid of it all, but we might get rid of some of it. So the obvious next question is, you're saying that based on information that you've had and you've received. What is the information that you've received, and which parts do you think are under threat?
I'm afraid I'm unable to comment on that before the case.
I thought you might say that, but I figured I'd ask.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Are there other questions? I've got a question still for Cynthia. In relation to advertising, it's true that we've not talked a lot about it. FDA also is going to regulate advertising. Will it forbid it in the US? Even though in the US you see tobacco products being advertised. What about advertising in vaping in next months in the US?
Advertising and marketing next months will continue. This is no problem. And one of the issues that we have in the United States, and I think Patricia and I could probably spend 4 or 5 hours discussing, is the idea of marketing in the United States and how it is perceived by public health officials or the FDA or legislators. And in the United States, once the argument is made that the marketing is intended for children or to attract children, as we saw in the California videotape, all other discussions really come off of the table, because it will always be about that. But the reality of the situation is, and part of the nuances required to understand vapor and make appropriate legislation, is that smokers who are not aware of what the vaping products are need to be educated about what the vaping products are. Additionally, there is this confusion in the United States that adult smokers or adult vapors do not like flavors, and flavors are only attractive to minors, those under the age of 18 or 19. So we have a situation where, from a public health perspective, we want to move smokers over to the products. In order to be able to do that, we have to have the availability of flavors. And on the other side of that, we have the conflict that FDA and public health officials believe that the mere presence of flavors means that the industry is trying to attract young users.
Aujourd'hui, il est possible.
Today, is it possible to sell e-cigarettes to minors in the US? It's true that from Europe, we've got the feeling that regulations are quite diverse according to the states. It's also a source of uncertainty for professionals. The FDA, the regulation taken by the FDA could harmonize the rules. In the US, individual states, the 50 states, have already almost all set standards to forbid e-cigarettes, the sale of e-cigarettes to minor. The FDA is going to do it too within the framework of the regulation to come. But as a matter of fact, there are already laws because states have passed bills. Another thing about advertising is that according to law, the FDA is the only body at the federal level that can forbid advertising, but FDA has got then to draft a distinct regulation to address the issue of advertising. So they will organize a consultation. It's going to last for another 2 or 3 years. So, but in the coming 2 or 3 years, there will still be advertising. But the industry has got to behave in a responsible manner, because if we start advertising on TV channels for young people, children's TV channels, then if what we do is considered to be irresponsible, that period of 2 or 3 years will be shortened. So it's up to the industry to behave in a responsible way.
There is a subjective element when you discuss marketing. In the United States, there was a marketing campaign by an e-cig company, and they used a woman who was in her 40s, I think, and they were accused of trying to attract 15-year-old boys with a 40-something-year-old woman. And many people in the vapor space looked at this and they said, well, perhaps they're trying to attract 40-year-old men with this woman. And so there is this idea that, not the idea, marketing is a subjective issue, and we don't, in the United States, currently have a platform where we're each speaking the same language. FDA says one thing, public health says another thing. We believe in advertisement. There was another one with a very pretty girl wearing a bikini. And I think all you saw was the bikini bottom, and this was a big problem. When they use a color like pink or yellow, this is a big problem. So the question is, what is appropriate marketing that will reach adult smokers but withhold criticism from public health?
Liam, you want?
Yeah, in the UK, we've got an eminently sensible set of marketing regulations that are already in place from CAP and ASA. We're not allowed to have advertisements that show people under the age of 25, so we've got a few things that are designed to reduce youth appeal. And the restrictions that they came up with were actually a particularly good set that I think all responsible companies fell in with very quickly and easily, which I guess is another reason why I found the TPD restrictions on marketing to be so disappointing.
Est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
Other questions? The question was asked before we started regarding the size of tanks in the US, because it's true that the European Directive is going to limit to 2 milliliters the size of tanks. Is there anything of the kind in the US? No. So regarding devices, it's rather simple when you've got all requirements met, because everything that relates to the composition and emissions Do you have some more information regarding emissions? That is one of the big issues for the European Commission currently.
Big emissions issue in the United States. Really, the battle with us centers largely on the e-liquid. Already in the United States, if you look at the batteries, for example, the majority of batteries come from the Far East. We already have quite a lot of requirements to import those batteries to begin with, and so from a safety perspective, they're already covered. And emissions is not an issue that comes up really ever, hardly.
La nouvelle réglementation.
The new regulation will require a listing of emissions of ingredients and to report the ingredients to the FDA. But as a matter of fact, it's just an additional matter. It's going to be a bit more costly because we'll have to test the products, etc. But it's going to last another year or more with a new regulation, so it's easier. Patricia, to be a little bit more technical, it's true that in Europe we'd be in a logic of statement, whereas in the US it'd be about respecting the requirements. So you'd have to abide by elements set by the FDA. Isn't that going to be complicated? No. No, we've got to have the agreement of FDA to change the product. So the FDA is not going to set a list of requirements. They're not going to describe the product, but they're going to monitor what manufacturers or importers draft in their reports and applications, and they're going to say whether the product may stay on the market or not. So it's almost a negative agreement. According to which criteria? According to which criteria will the product be allowed to stay on the market or not? Well, it's very interesting because the FDA doesn't give any criteria. That's the issue that we've had in the last 6 years with the conventional tobacco products. FDA doesn't say you shouldn't have more than 10 milligrams or more than or less than this or that. No. They look at the product and they decide. For every product, one by one, if it can stay on the market. It's very subjective. This is, I think, what is going to be brought to justice. That is going to be challenged in court because FDA can't be objective because they don't set, as a matter of fact, specific criteria. This is the main issue with regulation in the US. Yeah, I mean, in relation to the subjectivity of the FDA, there's the objectivity in the UK with the pass that you published with the BSI. That is also a set of specifications for the production of e-liquids. Do you believe that the pass could be an answer to a smart regulation tomorrow with clear requirements for the manufacturers of e-liquids?
The pass is actually a really useful document because it gives people some very specific guidance on what should and what shouldn't be in e-liquid and how it can be responsibly produced. But it is just guidance. It's not a specification. Because of that, it probably is not ultimately the final word on what should be in e-liquid and how it should be produced. But I think it takes us a long way further than the FDA have gone so far. And perhaps a long way further than the TPD notifications have gone so far, in that it does actually pick out some chemicals that could appear in e-liquid that really shouldn't be there and should be tested for. And I think those chemicals are things that a lot of responsible companies are testing for already.
Une dernière question pour vous trois, la même. On a fait un...
Same question for you three, last one. We did some fiction vaping. Asking the question, according to you, in 10 years' time, where will be vaping at what will be the prevalence in relation to tobacco? Will there be more vapers than smokers, do you believe, in 2025? Do you believe that there will be more vapers than smokers? Will that be the end of tobacco despite very strict regulation?
It looks like in 10 years or 15 or 25 years depends largely on what happens with FDA and also with the message that is put out about vaping. Currently in the US, the number of people that believe vaping is equally or more dangerous than smoking is growing. So if the FDA, if companies are able to survive the process through FDA, but the information that is put out by public health continues to skew on the side of error and just not being true, then we will have a situation where there is no incentive for smokers to move over to vaping. And we will not be able to overtake it, and there will continue to be more smokers than vapers, which would be very unfortunate.
A very wise man said a couple of years ago, you can't stop a tsunami with regulation. And vaping as a phenomenon is a tsunami. And whether it happens on the open market, the black market, or the grey market, the news is now out that this is safer than smoking cigarettes. And in 10 years' time, it has the potential to all but wipe out combustible tobacco. I think that I'm very confident that there will be more vapers than smokers, perhaps not worldwide, but certainly in Europe and in the USA.
Patricia?
Absolument d'accord. La réglementation ne peut pas arrêter ce...
It's true. Regulations can't stop an army, but it's possible nevertheless to make it slower. So I hope that in 10 years' time there will be much more vapers than smokers. So I believe the industry has got a great future. Thank you. It was the question before last, because there's one question in the audience, I think, on this side, if there's a mic. One last question. We've got 5 minutes left. Just a question for SFATA. What is your technique to face the dissemination of wrong information in the US? Very often we wonder in France and in Europe if it's possible to be heard with the message of associations of consumers and the message of vaping companies. So how can the SFATA make sure that they're heard by the public at large, and so that the public at large understands that it's an alternative?
Thank you for the question. We spend quite a bit of time meeting with legislators and explaining to them what the difference is between vaping and smoking. It's a very long, laborious process because there is so much preconception, and the damage, a lot of the damage has already been done. So it's very difficult. In California, for example, we have gone to multiple hearings and we have taken this many studies to support what a good potential vapor is for the health of smokers. And the problem is we don't have, and I will be very frank, in California they allotted $75 million over the next 5 years to the campaign to discredit vaping. We do not have $75 million to combat this campaign. So our work is much slower. We employ lobbyists. We have our members meet directly with legislators and health officials, and really what we try to do is grassroots work. We connect with the local people and work it up. We also meet with people in Washington, D.C. and this kind of thing, but it's a very slow process. And I always tell the vapers and the vapor business owners, the key is not to educate vapers. The key is to educate the non-vapers, because they are the ones who are resistant to this technology. So
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, and maybe a supplement? Yeah, I've just come back from the US, where the regulation of products of cannabis has become a true business. There's a fair devoted to grass to cannabis for therapeutic virtues, but it was quite fast. It was perceived as a medical need to consume cannabis, even though, to start with, it's a product that people smoke. So it's strange because, it's not about smoking when it's about cannabis, but it seems that the gap between vaping and smoking is not as big as between vaping and smoking cannabis, even though vaping is forbidden.
It's a strange world that we live in when cannabis has an easier time surviving than vapor does. In California, they were making an exception on the use of vaporizers as long as they were used for cannabis. So not for vapor, but okay for cannabis. So the distortion, this is the amount of work that we face because it's so backwards. It's so different than what it really should be, and it's a long job. It's a constant battle that we have, and hopefully we can all stay in it and moving in the same direction to get where we need to go.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à toutes et à tous.
Thank you all.